I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Richard Milton Bolling. I'm the youngest of four in the Bolling clan, and I was born in March of 1959, and that's important. I was born March 2nd, 1959, besides the fact that I was born. Um, that is, that I only a few years ago I did the math on this, and I thought, well, when was I conceived? And Dad's last season was 1958, and it was with the Detroit Tigers. Did not have good batting. I think, definitely he did not play in that many games. He played with Uncle Frank, but it was not a good season for him. And so he was released from the Tigers in like June or July of 1958. And we only found out, I think it was after he died, that he was actually brought down. He finished out the season with a AAA team, which must have been a Detroit Tigers team. And we had these rings, these World Series rings. Dad was never in the World Series, but we had World Series rings from the Boston Red Sox from the times that they were in the World Series. We were divvying that up. And we had this one ring we didn't know about, so I researched it, and it was this AAA ball club that they actually had a really good season. I think they won their championship or something. So, but he nearly never talked about that, and I guess you really don't blame him. But I was thinking about it, and I said, oh my goodness, that means I was conceived in Detroit, and I always thought to myself I was conceived out of frustration. Dad was not having a good season, man. you know, well, thank goodness that it happened. So I'm thankful. He may not have been about the season, but anyway. So that was really interesting. And the second thing about that was most likely it was probably in Detroit, and I'm a big car nut. And I worked on cars for most of my life. And although there were European and Japanese cars, Detroit's the Motor City. So I said, boy, there's a big connection here, right? So maybe feel pretty good. There's got to be something to it, right? So there's that fact. The other thing is Richard Milton Bolling. So the story is that, first of all, Dad was Milton Joseph Bolling, so Cary has for his middle name Joseph. I have for my middle name Milton, but it was supposed to be my first name. It was supposed to be Milton whatever Bolling. I don't know. I don't think it was supposed to be Richard. Milton Bolling. And my grandmother, his mother, said, oh, Milton, you don't want to do that. Milton is not a good name now. You need to give him another name. I don't know where Richard came from. The story is she said, well, Richard's a really good name now. And so that's how I got to be Richard. And they moved Milton to the middle. And so I was really always known in my family as Rick. Okay, so I'm a Bolling. And so the whole time that I was growing up, as far back as I can remember, now, of course, I was born in Mobile, but then we moved to Boston, and then we came back, and I was back I was at kindergarten, from kindergarten on in Mobile, till I left when I was 18, after I was 18, to go to college. But the whole time I was growing up, if I went somewhere and I said my name was Rick Bolling, they would say, are you Milton Frank's son? The whole time I was growing up in Mobile, you would get that. And it's interesting, you got to know Mobile, especially at that time in the 60s and 70s. It's like, I tell people it's the biggest small town you'll ever be at. It just seemed like everybody knew everybody, And so there weren't any other Bollings. It was just, we were the Bollings, and they wanted to know, was I Milton Frank's son? So it was, you didn't have celebrity status. And and this is the interesting thing, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I never thought of myself, I thought of myself as being from an important family, okay? Mobile family. And And I knew that, but I you know, kind of inwardly prided myself on that. It made things nicer for me, you know, to have that. Well, I wasn't cocky about it because we were never taught to be cocky when I was growing up. Far from it. We were always taught to be humble and to always, you know, be thankful for the gifts that we had and all that type of stuff. And I'll talk about that in a minute with Dad talking to ball players. Only later did I realize what a massive achievement it was that both Dad and Uncle Frank were major league ball players. Because I would get in conversations with people, you know, through the decades of growing older and everything. And they say, oh yeah, well, you know, so-and-so, or well, my brother, you know, they played in professional sports and stuff like that. It may have even been baseball. And I'd say, oh, who'd they play for? Well, you know, they played like AA ball for somebody for like a year or so. And and I'm telling you, it's really rare to run into somebody whose father was a major league ball player. It is really rare to see that. You know, and I think about it, you know, football's the big thing in the South, and you might run into somebody that said, you know, like, oh, he played professional ball, you know, he played for the NFL for like a year or so. But with the major leagues, it's very different because you got that long time in the farm system. And you got to produce and you can't get injured. And the other thing about Dad that I realized, especially with him, now Dad he played 7 years in the majors, and Uncle Frank played 12. And Uncle Frank had solid numbers. He had very good, you know, you look at his batting average and it's like, he was really consistent, right? All the way through. And he was a really good ball player. And Dad was a really good ball player too, but he was injured a lot. He spent most of his career injured playing at a really high level. And, you know, you come to admire that because it's like, oh my goodness. You know, it's so hard just to get to the major leagues, and then you're playing at that level, banged up and stuff like that. It's you know, it's really something. So you come to appreciate that type of stuff. And, you know, I never, and I'm even now, like if I'm talking to somebody and they bring up Major League Baseball, something like that, I don't want to immediately say, well, my father played for the, you know, the Red Sox. I like to, I don't want to play that card where I mean, I'm proud of them, but I don't want to be like, hey, guess what? You know, all that type of stuff. So it makes me look at sports a little differently. I'm a different type of fan because of that too. I'm like, I really like Auburn football. It's really great, stuff like that, but I'm not one of these crazy fans about it. And I think that kind of goes into, I always see things from, I tend to see things from a player's perspective rather than from a coaching perspective. Like when somebody, like let's say with Auburn football, we lose a game because our field goal kicker missed 4 field goals in a row. And everybody is so upset and, you know, just bad mouthing this guy and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, you know, he felt pretty bad about it too. And that's really Dad's perspective, because he saw things from a player's perspective all the time. And that's why it was so neat seeing ball games with him. I remember Uncle Frank saying one time, I think it may have been in one of his interviews, he said, your father said Milt was the best high school athlete I've ever seen. And Dad and Uncle Frank saw a lot of stuff. Uncle Frank was an incredible player. Hit a grand slam off of Sandy Koufax. And just really great glove and stuff like that. Dad, I'm sure Dad had a better arm because Uncle Frank was a second baseman. You don't have to have a great arm. Shortstop, you got to have a great arm, and third base. But boy, you know, really great. But Dad, I remember him talking about that. And so when I would think back about what Dad would talk about in sports, like his achievements in sports and stuff like that, and he was never bragging. He would talk about like teams he was on. It was a lot of high school stuff. He was an incredible basketball player. incredible basketball player. And they had a great team in high school in the 40s at McGill that he was the main guy on. I was a three-sport guy, but it was in what we call grammar school, right? Up to 8th grade. I'm a lefty. I've got good athletic ability, and I was very fast. I was one of the fastest guys in the school. What I did not have, there were two things I didn't have, and this is the main reason why I did not go on. And really, everybody can make excuses for themselves, and I'm not. The first one is I did not have, in baseball especially, I did not have that really great instinct that you need to go on to the next level, even with junior college. You got to have that really good instinct about kind of seeing what situations are in a game so you don't have a whole lot of wasted movement. I mean, that's really a big thing. I mean, I had a lot of good athletic ability, but I would probably waste a lot of that movement and stuff, not realizing that I need to be a step over here, a step over there, or this guy's going to do this because this situation, right? Dad was really good at that stuff. And that's something you can teach to a certain amount, but if you're going to get to a bigger level, that's just something people know instinctually. My son Atticus has got really good instinct in sports. He can kind of see this type of stuff. As far as my siblings are concerned, Val has got it in spades. She's really the best with that. She can see that. And here's the other thing that you have to do is you have to exploit it and not be afraid of exploiting it. It's like, okay, well, that's his weakness. I'm going to exploit it, And it's not a personal thing, right? It's just that's what we do in the sports. Maybe best friends afterward, but this is the way it's done, right? So that's one thing, and that I think, that a certain amount that can be taught. But this is the thing that I did not have that even other men and stuff would talk about with me. It's like that. I said, Rick, you just don't have, and they would say, the desire. You don't have the desire. And they were right. They were right. I didn't have that desire to go on to the next level, to really, bring this all the way through. You gotta have that. You gotta have that desire. I mean, like you look at Dad with what he did, and Uncle Frank too, right? But I'm talking about Dad with his injuries, stuff like that. Man, you're talking about a whole lot of desire, because you could just pack it in and say, look, there are other things to do in life, man. I don't want to do this. Dad was always trying to work on my game and everything. He was never pushy about my baseball career, athletic career, or something like that. And later in life, I think, well, maybe he should have pushed me a little bit more. But he would always practice with me. He would always come up with stuff, I need to work on and stuff like that, and in a very nice way. And I was left-hander, and I was not very accurate, but I had a really good arm, and I had a pretty good bat, at least in practice. I wasn't great in the game, but I really could hit those home runs in practice. And that was one thing a scout did bring up to me. It's like, great in practice, but not, as good in the game. And you got to kind of like reverse that. But, so I was usually in a right field. And that's where you put somebody who's got a really good arm, because I'll be able to make that throw to third. And I could hit decently. If you're left-handed, you can't play infield unless you're at first base. And I did play a little bit at first base. So anyway, I had to learn how to field ground balls out in the outfield and fly balls. That's real important. So so Dad would work on that with me. And one of the best places we ever did that was we were barefoot. We were on the beach at Lake Charles, Louisiana. And it's just like a little lake that's there. And I want to say the hotel, the Holiday Inn or whatever, was right there on the beach. But we may have driven there. I may be conflating things. And I was probably, about that same age, 14, 15 years old or whatever. And it was great. Dad could hit some really good fly balls. And we got there with the bat. I had my glove. He got some baseballs. He's got the bat. It's right by this big bridge that goes over there. And we hit fly balls in the morning. It was probably like after breakfast. Or it may have been before breakfast, and we went to, go get some breakfast or whatever. Out there barefoot, and I did pretty well. I could catch fly balls pretty well on a beach. Barefoot. So those are really good memories.